Hey guys, tonight, we slip barefoot into the warm, whispering earth of ancient Ethiopia, where paint was never squeezed from a tube, but born instead from stone fire and time. The air is bone dry, full of drifting dust and eucalyptus smoke. You stand on a ridge at dawn, toes in ochre soil so red it looks like spilled rust. In the valley below, gentle hills roll out like sleeping animals, their flanks streaked with colors the earth mixed long before you arrived. You wouldn't survive here not long anyway. Not without knowing which rocks to crush, which fires to stoke, which water to fetch before sunrise. This isn't your cozy weekend watercolor class. This is elemental chemistry without goggles. And yes, someone always inhales too much bone ash. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd also love to know where you're listening from. Drop your city and local time in the comments. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge downhill slowly, each footfall kicking up a little puff of fine clay. In your hands you carry nothing but a pouch, soft goat hide worn smooth on the inside from years of gathering pigment. You've done this walk before, though not in this body. Maybe it was another life. Maybe it's the collective memory of thousands who came before you barefoot just like this. The red clay is what you're after today. You spot it on a southern-facing slope cracked from the dry season, but still holding its rusty glow. Historians still argue whether this kind of iron-rich soil was first used for decoration, ceremony, or burial, but you're not arguing. You're crouched down, scratching the earth with a sliver of obsidian, trying to get to the good stuff underneath. You gather the clay into your pouch slowly. It's fine and powdery, almost silky. Not just dirt. This stuff stains. Rubbing it between your fingers leaves a smear like dried blood. One joke the elders tell, well, it's more of a warning really, is that red clay always remembers what it was mixed with: sweatwater, ash. And sometimes worse. You sit for a moment on a sun-warmed rock, just breathing. The highland wind hums softly. Somewhere to your left, a bird calls out with a note that sounds like a yawn. You consider heading back, but there's something else up the ridge. A pale vein of yellow ochre, barely visible unless the light hits it just right. You climb. Slowly. Your knees don't love it, but the colors demand attention. The yellow is chalkier than the red. Crumbly, less dramatic, but it has a warmth that makes it worth the scrape. In the right hands, this ochre becomes sunlight on stone, gold halos in manuscripts, warm undertones in a saint's cheek. And now your pouch is heavier. Not just with earth, but with intention. Because every painter here is also a bit of a priest, a chemist, a storykeeper. And every handful of dirt you've gathered will one day cover walls or skin or holy books. On the walk back, you pass a line of termite mounds, tall clay-red towers, the color of your fingers. One scholar once joked that early artists may have learned from the termites. They knew where the best earth was long before humans did. Maybe they were the first pigment miners. And you can't help but laugh at the idea of a termite, tiny and serious, hauling a bit of color to some hidden mural in the dark. You reach the village just as the sun clears the mountains. Children run past, their feet slapping the ground like little drums. One of them stops when he sees your red-stained hands. He points and grins. Blood, he asks. You shake your head. Color, you say. And he shrugs like that's even more magical. At your hut, you spread the pigment out in a shallow clay tray. It needs to dry more, sun-baked, pulverized again, and stored in gourds before it's mixed. Your tools are ready: a flat grinding stone, a pestle smooth as river pebbles, a handful of goat hair for brushes. The smell of the village rises: wood smoke, fermented grain, and eucalyptus leaves hanging in the cool shadows. It's funny, modern artists chase vibrant color in tubes with names like cadmium scarlet and ultramarine. But here, all you need is the earth, the patience to walk barefoot, and a rock to crush it into story. You yawn. The clay dust clings to your nails. And somewhere out there, another artist is crouching over another hillside, digging for the same red your fingers now hold. The morning thickens as you begin to grind. You squat on a woven mat beneath a thatched awning, the kind that sways just enough to make shadows flicker across your work like candlelight. Your hands grip the stone pestle worn into a gentle curve from generations of use. You begin pressing it into the dry clay, slow circles, then harder pushes, then a rhythm, not unlike breathing. The sound it makes is like someone whispering secrets into sand. Every pigment here begins with patience. You can't rush earth. You can't force fire. And your biceps are starting to complain, but the clay powder is getting finer, and that's all that matters. You catch a breeze full of peppery charcoal smoke from the neighboring hut. It means they've started on the black pigment, the kind made from charred twigs and resin-soaked pine cones. You'll go there soon. A girl passes by balancing a skin of goat's milk on her head. She sees you grinding and gives a nod, approval or boredom or both. Around here, color making isn't glamorous. It's just something you do, like herding or sweeping. But there's pride in it. The same way someone might brag about knowing the perfect recipe for flatbread, you know the perfect ratio of clay to fat to binder. Which changes, of course, depending on the humidity. And the mood of the goat, apparently. Your current batch is nearly ready. The red is now like powdery velvet, soft as flour. But it won't stick to anything, not until you mix it with something that binds. In Ethiopia, that meant whatever was at hand: water, egg, white goat milk, even tree sap. Sometimes the oil from crushed seeds. Sometimes a little blood. Historians still argue whether the blood thing was ritual or practical. One dusty scholar insists it's superstition, another claims it improved adhesion on frescoes. You're more concerned with how sticky it is on hot days. Either way, you're not using blood today. Not yours, at least. Instead, you pull a goat bladder from a gourd. It's filled with animal fat infused with local herbs. It smells terrible. You wince, but it works. You add a few drops to the clay powder and stir it slowly with your finger. It resists, then softens, then blends into something not quite liquid, not quite solid. When you drag a stick through it, it leaves a clear line. That's how you know it's good. In the next hut over, someone is preparing black pigment. You head over, and your nose tells you everything before you even arrive. Burnt twigs, resin smoke, the smell of soot clinging to everything. You step inside and wave at the smoke. A man crouches by the hearth, stirring a clay pot over an open flame. Inside, crushed charcoal, a lump of tree resin, and what looks like the remains of yesterday's fire. Too much pine, he mutters, half to you, half to himself. It bubbles. You watch him work the mixture, bubbling thickly into something that looks like tar. He adds powdered bone, sifted carefully so fine it practically vanishes, and suddenly the whole pot goes dark and glossy. This isn't just paint anymore. It's armor, shadow, absence. When you paint with this, it feels like you're drawing lines from the edge of the void. He hands you a bit on a shell. You smear it with your finger. It's rich, slick. It stains your nail and smells like old smoke. You thank him, slipping the shell into your pouch, careful not to let the red and black touch yet. They fight, those two. Always have. As you leave the hut, children race past again, this time playing some incomprehensible game that involves yelling at chickens. You shake your head. Some things never change. One of the elders watches from a stool, chuckling. When they quiet down, he says, "Then, you worry. Back at your space, you mix a little of the black with the red, just enough to dull the fire to make it more earthen. The result is a beautiful burnt sienna, warm like dried blood on sandstone. The kind of color you'd find on ancient rock walls deep in the Simien Mountains. Some say those paintings are 20,000 years old. Others say they're newer. The debate rages on. But everyone agrees the colors haven't faded. You paint a test stroke on a flat bit of limestone. It goes on smooth, creamy even. The brush you're using is made from goat hair tied with sinew to a twig. Not fancy, but it feels right in your hand, like holding a thought. As the day warms, the village smells shift, cooking grains, heating oils, and that unmistakable tang of wet earth. Someone's grinding yellow pigment nearby. You hear the scrape of stone on stone and feel oddly content. This is a world of textures and smells and sounds, not notifications and deadlines. You sit for a moment, eyes closed. And for the briefest second, it's easy to believe that color could be sacred. That the very act of grinding red clay, of catching charcoal from fire, of mixing fat and mineral, that it might be something the gods notice. The smoke from the charcoal hut still clings to your tunic as you make your way toward the back of the village, where another kind of black awaits, this one, darker, richer, almost unnervingly glossy. Here, near a shallow trench lined with volcanic stone, a different pigment is being prepared. One that doesn't come from twigs or ash, but from something more ancient. Something that once lived, died, and was buried. You approach with curiosity and a little unease. The pigment master, a wiry elder with hair like threadbare rope, motions you closer. No words, just a nod. He gestures toward the fire pit where goat bones are being slowly burned, buried halfway in coals. The smell is dry, faintly sweet, like roasting marrow, but twisted. It's the kind of scent that clings to your memory like a page left too long in sunlight. The fire crackles lazily as he turns the bones with tongs. The once creamy white is now gray, edges curling inward, forming little valleys of shadow. When the bones are cooled, he'll grind them into powder bone black, richer than charcoal, finer than soot, and hauntingly permanent. You kneel beside him and he finally speaks. Bone remembers. That's all he says. It's a strange thought, but you nod anyway. He's right. Bone pigment isn't just about color, it's about permanence. This is the black used in burial murals, in protective symbols, etched behind altars. The kind you don't paint lightly. And historians still argue whether it was chosen for its aesthetic properties or its spiritual significance. You're leaning toward both. As you help lift the cooled bones into a grinding bowl, you notice how fragile they've become. One tap, and they shatter like old porcelain. The elder begins crushing them with slow, practiced movements, using a wide stone that's darkened with decades of pigment. You join in, working beside him in silence, except for the low groan of stone against stone. You glance around the work area. Goat bladders hang from a beam filled with different oils and resins. There's a pot of egg white carefully separated this morning from a goose egg, and a cracked gourd of honey. Honey surprisingly makes an excellent binder in small quantities. It also attracts ants, which is why it's always stored well above ground. Today, the bone pigment will be mixed with a blend of egg white and tree sap. The egg white gives it a satiny flow. The sap adds body. You stir slowly, carefully, until the mix resembles ink, thick, dense, and faintly iridescent. You test it on a sliver of smooth bark. It glides across like a secret. The elder approves with a grunt. Good, he says, and that one word feels like applause. You thank him and slip the small bark test into your pouch. It's your first sample of bone black, and something about holding it makes you feel connected to 1,000 unnamed hands that did the same hundreds, maybe thousands of years ago. On the walk back, you pass a young woman preparing goat skins stretched on wooden frames. The skins are pale translucent. Not for drums, these are parchment. You pause to watch. She scrapes them with a flint blade, carefully removing every hint of fat. She's humming something low, and her rhythm matches your heartbeat. This is where the pigment sometimes goes, not just murals and pottery, but into books, holy books, spell books, marriage ledgers. Once dry, those skins will be painted with all the colors you've been learning to mix. You ask her what she'll write. Maybe prayers, she says. Maybe recipes. You laugh. Same thing. And she shrugs. Food saves the body. Prayer saves the rest. As you head home again, the hills glow softly in the late sun, and you notice the way the light hits the earth, highlighting reds, deepening blacks, setting yellow glints into dry gravel. No wonder color mattered here. This is a place where light shifts constantly. If you don't paint it, it vanishes. Back at your hut, you open your pouch and lay out your 3 samples so far: red, ochre, burnt charcoal black, and the new bone black. The contrast between them is stunning. Red, warm and alive. Charcoal black, smoky and soft. Bone black, cool and final. You imagine a mural made with just these 3. Maybe a story of birth, fire and death. Or a portrait your grandmother, perhaps in her ceremonial shawl, her face in charcoal, her eyes outlined in bone. The background in ochre glowing like sunset. You yawn, surprised at how heavy your eyelids feel. It's been a full day of pigment hunting, fire tending and bone grinding. The village grows quieter now. You hear a single flute drifting over the rooftops, soft as breath. And somewhere a chicken is probably still being chased. You smile to yourself. Maybe tomorrow you'll seek yellow ochre or that elusive green made from copper scrap. But for tonight, you're content with red-black, and the way the earth remembers everything, especially when you crush it, mix it and brush it gently onto something that will last longer than your bones ever will. You wake early, though you didn't plan to. There's no rooster, just the slow roll of wind over canvas roofs and the rhythmic creak of the grinding hut's pulley frame. Someone's already working. You rub your eyes and step outside, the morning light gold and dusty, like someone spilled tea across the sky. Today is for color born of smoke and sap. Not all pigment here comes from earth. Some emerge from flame and forest, like the soot-black ink you're heading toward now. At the edge of the village, nestled between 2 flat stones, is a pit fire smoldering from the night before. A young man, barely out of boyhood, tends to it carefully. His hands are already stained gray-black, his eyelids still sticky with sleep. He nods to you and lifts a lid from a terracotta pot resting in the coals. The smell is immediate, sharp, resinous, and warm. Inside the pot, a mess of charred bark, sticky pine sap, and a splatter of animal fat. This is no casual campfire. It's a carefully curated combustion chamber designed to yield one thing: pigment. The carbon-heavy kind. The kind that clings to skin, clothes, and memories. The kind used for sacred symbols drawn in smoke. You kneel beside him. He explains in few words: too many twigs, and it flakes. Too much sap, and it won't dry. It's a balancing act. Art rarely announces itself loudly here. It's in these quiet calibrations, these unconscious calculations of ratio and flame. The result, after hours of slow reduction, is a thick tar-like soot paste. It's scraped out with curved sticks and left to cool on sun-warmed rocks. When dry, it will be ground again, sifted through fine reeds, and mixed with liquid from boiled fruit peels, a surprising binder with a faint citrus tang. You test it. Your fingertip sinks into the paste like dipping into shadow. It smells faintly sweet, like pine trees trying to whisper something. You smear it on your wrist. It goes on smooth, leaving behind a line that catches no light. True matte black. The kind favored by those who draw at night, who mark tombs or shield interiors from the sun's gaze. Historians still debate whether this particular soot black was reserved for sacred purposes, or if it just lasted longer in damp climates. Some even argue it was used in eye makeup as a kind of protocol, but no one agrees on the exact formula. And of course, no one ever wrote it down. You sit for a while with the young pigment maker, saying little. He offers you a gourd of water. It's cool and tastes faintly of clay, the kind of thing that reminds you how closely water and earth live together here. Eventually, you return to your hut with a fresh smear of black drying on a leaf. The smell follows you, a mixture of forest fire and honeycomb. You add it to your collection, your little menagerie of colors growing by the day. 4 samples now, each one with a backstory, each one earned. You pause, considering the next step. Color, as any ancient Ethiopian artist would tell you, isn't just about hue. It's about permanence. And permanence requires binder. You've already worked with animal fat and sap. Today, someone's boiling eggs. You follow the trail of laughter and warm spice to the communal cooking pit. A woman is cracking eggs over a heated stone, some for breakfast, some for paint. She separates yolk from white with practiced ease, saving the whites in a gourd coated with ash to keep it cool. Egg white is a magical thing in this context. Known as glare, it dries clear, shrinks slightly, and binds pigment like a spell. You offer her a bit of your soot black, and she dips a woven brush into it. One long stroke across a strip of parchment, and it stays. No smear, no streak, just clean, dark intention. She grins. That's good soot. You nod. From the pine pit, she hums. No. That's acacia bark. Different fire. Different mood. You realize suddenly that fire here is not just a tool, it's a language. Each tree burns differently. Each sap has its own voice. Color is just how the fire speaks afterward. You take some egg white back with you, cradled carefully in a bowl wrapped with damp cloth. You don't want it too warm, it thickens. You don't want it too cold, it separates. Like everything in this place, it has an opinion. Back at your space, you line up your pigments: red ochre, charcoal black bone, black, and now soot black mixed with egg white. You test each one on a palm-sized tile. The difference is startling. Bone black has depth. Charcoal is softer. Soot black is bold, slick, almost modern-looking. It belongs on cave walls and poetry pages alike. You sit back satisfied. The sun has risen to its full glare now, and the village simmers in silence. Somewhere a dog yawns. Somewhere else someone sneezes twice loudly. You stifle a chuckle. Even in these ancient routines, people are still people, and your brushes weight thin. Reeds tied with sinew. Soft goat hair trimmed by hand, some older than you'd care to guess. You dip one into the soot black, raise it to a new scrap of bark, and trace a single line. It is smooth. It is simple. It is color born of earth smoke and the endless quiet patience of fire. The day drifts on in that timeless way only found in places without clocks. The village slows in the midday heat, and you settle beneath the slatted shade of a fig tree, your legs stretched, your fingers still stained with black and rust. Today's work, you decide, will focus on binding the strange science of making dust stick to walls, skin, or parchment without blowing away at the first sneeze. You reach for the pouch that holds the less glamorous ingredients: animal glue, sap, the occasional congealed chunk of something that might have once been cow marrow. One small gourd even contains a yellowish paste made from fermented goat milk. Yes, it smells as bad as you think. But the villagers swear it's unmatched for sealing pigment into stone. You pick up your stone palette and pour a little of the goat milk binder onto a ridge of bone-black pigment. It hisses faintly as it hits the powder, like it disapproves of the company. But slowly, with the back of a brush, you work it together, and it becomes a luscious black paint that clings to your skin like ink from a very old book. Binders are the unsung heroes of color. Without them, pigment is just fancy dirt. With them, it becomes memory. Today, though, you're not the only one thinking about memory. An elder woman has arrived, calling you to her courtyard with a flick of the wrist and a look that brooks no delay. You follow. Her hands are as gnarled as olive roots, but her eyes are sharp and oddly playful. She lays out a flat slab of limestone and places 3 bowls beside it, one filled with yellow ochre, one with burnt umber, and one that smells suspiciously like rotten eggs. Egg yolk, she says simply. We make tempera. You raise an eyebrow. She smirks. You think goat milk is bad? Tempera, she explains as she works, is a fast-drying egg yolk-based paint used in Ethiopia for centuries to paint religious icons, wall murals, and manuscript illuminations. The process isn't easy. You have to puncture the yolk sac, drain the liquid, and discard the membrane, otherwise it clumps. Then you whisk the yolk with a few drops of water, sometimes a bit of vinegar or fig sap to cut the smell. Historians still argue whether Ethiopian artists learned tempera techniques independently or adapted them from Coptic traditions through early Christian contact. The debate is spirited, but frankly, after smelling this egg mixture up close, You doubt anyone would copy it on purpose. Still, when she mixes the yolk with the red ochre you brought her, something incredible happens. The color transforms, deepens, thickens, almost glows. On the limestone it spreads like melted copper. You're mesmerized. She chuckles and hands you a brush. Your turn. You dip it, stroke it across the stone, and it's like painting with molten earth. The pigment sets almost instantly, locking in a warm sheen that no sap or glue could ever provide. Tempera lasts, she says. Longer than blood. Longer than names. You believe her. In monasteries across the highlands there are still icons painted with this same yolk and ochre mix, eyes of saints, staring out from cracked wood panels, unchanged by time, or rain, or fire. It's humbling. You thank her, wrapping your fingers around the brush like a sacred relic, and carry the slab back to your space. You've now tried 5 different paint mixtures, each one with its own quirks and temperaments. You line them up and stare: charcoal with sap bone black, with egg white soot, with fruit peel ochre, with fat ochre, with yolk. Color doesn't just come from rocks and fire, it comes from compromise. Every shade is a negotiation between the earth and what you can convince it to become. You begin a small mural on a plank of dried acacia wood. Nothing ambitious. Just a spiral sun, a goat, and a flowering branch. It's not meant to be art. It's meant to practice your understanding of how the pigments behave, how much pressure the brush wants, how quickly the binder dries, whether it flakes or fades. As you work, a child watches silently from the corner. He doesn't speak, but his eyes follow every stroke. When you finish, he points at the branch and says, "My grandmother paints that in her kitchen." You look at the crude flower. Does hers look better? He nods solemnly. Much. You laugh. Maybe she'll teach me. Maybe, he says clearly doubtful. The day begins to cool. The light shifts again, drawing long shadows and making the pigments darken on the wood. You sit with your small mural, watching the colors settle the way steam settles off tea. It's oddly comforting. Somewhere someone is pounding roots to make dye. Someone else is boiling bark. The village never truly sleeps. It just breathes more slowly when the sun dips. You lie back, your fingers stained your back, sore, your head full of color and scent. You've learned so much already, and yet the most ancient pigments are still ahead. You've barely scratched the surface of what Ethiopian earth can offer. But that's for tomorrow. Tonight you watch the paint dry. The next morning arrives like warm silk across your face. Not dramatic, not insistent. Just there, humming low through the trees and nudging the woven door aside with fingers of gold light. You sit up slowly, rubbing sleep from your eyes and feeling yesterday's colors still clinging to your fingertips. Dry, chalky ghosts of red and black, egg and smoke. Today you decide is for color made from fire's twin ash. You head toward the far end of the village where the ground dips slightly, forming a shallow hollow lined with dark silt and the remnants of old bonfires. This is where they burn the roots. Not to warm themselves, not to cook bread, but to make something entirely different: gray pigment. Yes, gray. It's not flashy. It doesn't sparkle. But it has a softness, a wisdom. It balances all the drama of red and black. It whispers while the others shout. You find the ash maker already at work, poking at the slow glowing heart of a root fire. She is older, wrapped in a cloak the color of dry moss, and her hands are ashy just from standing nearby. She gestures to a small pile of roots at your feet. Hard, twisted things from a plant that barely grows anymore. This one gives silver, she says. This one gives smoke. You pick one up. It's strangely fragrant, like cedar and something more herbal. She tosses it into the fire. It smokes immediately, curling into the air like a lazy thought. She shows you how to watch it, not just when it burns, but how. The color of the smoke, the shape it takes, the ash it leaves behind. All of it matters. Historians still argue whether these burning methods were purely aesthetic, or if they held ritual meaning. Some say the smoke was part of a cleansing rite. Others say it was simply the most convenient way to make a pigment that could mimic stone, sky, or shadow. Either way, when the fire dies down and the roots are little more than gray ghosts, she lets them cool, then crumbles them between her fingers. The ash is impossibly soft, like powdered feather, like size. She offers you a handful and you gently pour it into a wide gourd. It looks unremarkable at first, dull gray dry. But when you add just a drop of vinegar and honey, it thickens into something smooth and satiny. On your testing tile, it spreads like dusk. You press your thumb into it and lift away a perfect print. It's the kind of gray that appears only in dreams or old stone ruins. The kind that remembers every shadow it's ever seen. You carry it back with reverence. On the way, you pass a cluster of children painting their clay toys with leftover pigments. One uses a turkey feather as a brush. Another is dipping fingers directly into a reddish gourd and smearing it across a tiny carved lion. The result is chaotic, joyful, completely unbothered by rules. You squat down beside them and hand over a small smear of your new gray ash paint. They inspect it seriously, far too seriously for children. One of them finally paints it onto a round stone and smiles. Now he has a beard, she says, pointing to what must be a lion. Close enough. You return to your workbench and prepare a few test strokes with the ash paint. It mixes beautifully with the yellow from earlier, creating a pale olive tone. Combined with red, it yields an almost violet gray that's impossible to describe properly. That's the thing about real pigment, it changes depending on the light, your skin, the temperature of your breath. You look around at your workspace: bark strips, acacia panels, shards of smooth limestone, all painted with variations of ochre, soot, bone, and ash. A palette, not of synthetic names, but of lives. Every color here required a fire, a tree, a death, or a walk. Nothing came easy. Nothing came quick. That evening, you decide to visit the old church at the edge of the hills. It's carved directly into the rock, a sunken structure half hidden by brush, its entrance worn smooth by centuries of barefoot passage. Inside, the air is cool and smells of frankincense and old rain. You run your hand along the painted walls. Faint but visible angels, saints, robed figures with calm eyes. Their outlines still echo the same colors you've been making. That deep, dusty red ochre. The outlines of the eyes bone black. The faint gray shadows beneath the halos, ash and vinegar, just like yours. You touch the stone and feel something strange, not reverence exactly, but connection. The quiet knowledge that some artist, maybe barefoot like you, stood here 500 years ago, brush in hand, trying to get the red to mix just right. Cursing at the humidity. Grinning when it finally worked. Outside, the moon is rising. You walk home by its light, your fingers brushing against wildflowers and dry leaves. The village is quieter than usual. Just the occasional snore, the distant bark of a bored dog, the gentle clang of someone forgetting to tie their goat properly. Back in your hut, you add the ash paint to your collection. Not the flashiest, but possibly your favorite. It reminds you of silence, of patience, of twilight settling over old things. You stretch. Your bones ache pleasantly. And you wonder as you drift toward your bedroll what it says about humanity, that one of our oldest obsessions was not war or gold or power, but color. It's not yet sunrise, but someone's banging pots near the well. And that's enough to wake you. You shuffle outside, rubbing your shoulder against the doorframe like a sleepy bear, and blink toward the hills. Today the sky's the color of smoke-stained parchment. Hazy pale, promising heat. You sip from a cup of lukewarm tea and decide that today you'll chase color in the one place most people avoid: the animal enclosure. You wouldn't expect it, but some of the most surprising pigments don't come from rocks or roots or ash. They come from beasts. Or more accurately, what's left of them. You start with the obvious yellow. There's a pigment made from urine, yes, really. Not just any urine, though. Cow urine from animals fed on mango leaves or certain herbs. You grimace imagining the trial and error of discovering that fact. The smell, for one thing. But it produces a soft golden yellow when filtered and dried into crystal flakes. Modern artists would weep. You arrive at the pen and greet the herder, a cheerful man who thinks your pigment experiments are deeply amusing. He shows you the bundle of dried grass and mango leaves he's been feeding a particular cow. She's the artist, he says, patting her affectionately. I'm just her assistant. It takes a while, days in fact, for the yellow pigment to develop properly, and you're not sticking around for that part. But he offers you a small gourd of the dried powder they've prepared before mixed with tree resin. It's a beautiful amber yellow, delicate, a little translucent like early morning sunlight sliding across polished stone. You test a bit on a piece of bark. It goes on softly warm and golden. Not as bold as ochre, not as dusty as ash, just warm, clean yellow. Honest. It surprises you. Historians still argue whether animal-derived pigments were common or ceremonial. Some say they were only used in magic-related work, sigils, spells, fertility charms. Others suggest they were simply practical. After all, cows are everywhere and paint is expensive. Back in your hut, you line the yellow sample next to your others. Your palate is growing. It looks like a strange meal. Blood rust, charcoal dust, yolk, glisten, soot smear. And now a pale gold that smells faintly of, let's say, pasture. You rinse your brush in a pot of rainwater and think about how every culture has its quirks when it comes to color. In some places, purple is royal. In others, red means luck. In Ethiopia, it turns out color often meant function. You didn't just pick a pigment for its beauty. You chose it because it did something protected, sanctified, preserved, or terrified. Which brings you to red again. But this time a different red, the kind that stains fingers and never quite fades from skin. This is the red from blood. Not fresh, not warm. Dried blood, processed, carefully dried in the sun, crushed and mixed with honey or sap. It was used rarely, sparingly, often in burial rites or to mark the outer thresholds of homes. The idea unsettles you a little. You've held many things in your hands, clay, ash, fire, but this is different. It feels too human. You ask an elder about it. She raises an eyebrow, then shrugs. It's just iron, she says. All color is iron sooner or later. It's a clinical answer, but one that holds a kind of logic. Blood red pigment was in many ways just another expression of iron oxide, the same mineral that gives ochre its hue. But the process, that was ceremonial, carefully supervised. You don't just go grinding old bandages and expect good results. You're shown a jar. Inside, flakes of something dark and curled. It doesn't look like blood. It looks like rusted leather. The pigment is treated, filtered, mixed with resin and crushed seeds. When you test it, it's not red, not like ochre. It's deeper, browner, like dried cherries or old wine stains. And strangely, beautiful. You spend the afternoon painting small circles and lines, using only this pigment and the cow yellow. The contrast is soft, ancient. It reminds you of bone beads and braided cord. You think of a burial shroud once uncovered near Aksum, faint red marks on woven fabric, the threads whispering stories no one could quite decode. Later, as you clean your brushes, a group of women pass carrying palm leaves and dye pots. They're headed to a courtyard near the center of the village. You follow. The courtyard is full of color. Palm leaves dyed in crimson, cobalt, and pale green hang to dry in the sun. The dyes shimmer slightly, their surfaces still damp. You ask how they're made. One of the women laughs. Some from bark, some from beetles, some from bad ideas. The red comes from insects smashed and soaked in vinegar. The green from boiled bark and river algae. The blue, though, that's the real prize. Indigo. Not native. Imported. Traded. Stolen. Fought over. You're offered a tiny pinch of it so rare it's stored in a hollow bone sealed with wax. The color is deep, almost unfathomable. You touch it reverently, then mix a tiny drop with warm water and gum arabic. The brush dips in. The color flows out like a secret. You paint a single curved line on a new strip of parchment. It dries into midnight, and you sit back stunned, knowing that just a few grains of this have changed everything. Tomorrow you think you'll chase more blue. But tonight your dreams will be filled with that perfect, impossible arc. Blue is rare. Blue is stubborn. Blue is the diva of the pigment world, unreasonably beautiful, impossibly difficult and quick to vanish if you so much as breathe wrong. This morning you wake before the sun, driven by the thought of that indigo line you painted yesterday. It's still there on the parchment, still stunning, but already the edges have dulled just a little. Like a memory. You want more. Not just of the color, but of the process, the chase, the alchemy. So you set off for the dye hut. It sits on the outer edge of the village near the fig trees, and the old stone wall that leans like it's sighing. The women there are already at work, steam rising from clay pots, nestled into shallow earth stoves. One pot smells earthy and green like bruised leaves and warm water. Another smells terrible. You try not to breathe too deeply. A woman sees you approach, smiles faintly, and gestures to a pot covered with a flat stone. Indigo, she says. If you're lucky, you are apparently just in time for the fermentation stage. Indigo, you quickly learn, isn't made so much as coaxed into being. The dye comes from the leaves of a specific plant, Indigofera tinctoria if you're fancy. Around here it has a local name and a long tradition. The leaves are soaked, fermented, stirred, then left to rest. What rises from the liquid isn't blue. It's swamp-colored with a hint of green, a sheen like oil. The magic happens when the liquid meets air. She lifts the stone lid, dips a ladle into the murky mixture, and pours it into a shallow bowl. Then she stirs quickly. The color begins to shift faintly, at first gray, to green, to deepening blue. You lean in. The transformation feels like watching dusk bloom from midday. She grins. It needs breath, she says, waving her hand over the bowl. Historians still argue whether indigo was introduced to Ethiopia through trade with India or Arabia, or whether it developed independently through experimentation with local flora. But no one debates its value. Blue was expensive. It traveled far. It marked status, sacredness, and sometimes mourning. And unlike other pigments, it didn't come from earth. It came from chemistry. You're handed a small piece of cotton pre-treated with ash water. The woman dips it into the pot, swishes it once, pulls it out, and it's green. Still green. You wait. And then air touches it. Blue. Not just any blue. That blue. Indigo. Sea before a storm blue. Midnight with moon blue. You hold the cloth like it's glowing. Back at your workspace, you're given a small batch of dried indigo cake, a chunky powdery material, darker than soot with a strange metallic smell. It must be carefully reconstituted using fermented fruit peel water, lime and thyme. Not paint in the usual sense. It behaves differently, doesn't like being forced. It wants patience, which thankfully you're getting better at. You prepare a small test. The liquid looks weak, pale, watery, but you trust it. You paint a spiral on a fragment of gourd. It dries to pale green. You fan it. Whisper to it. And slowly it turns. There's something deeply satisfying about watching a color become itself. Not arrive fully formed like red or black, but struggle. Transform. Emerge. You spend the next hour mixing and testing, combining indigo with soot black, seeing how it softens. You try it with ash gray, too dull. With yellow from cow urine pigment, suddenly a murky olive you can't name. Everything changes when blue is involved. It's like a troublemaker in a group project. Chaotic, but unforgettable. Later that day, you visit the church again, this time with blue on your mind. You search the icons more carefully. The saints, the robes, the sky. There, in a narrow band behind an angel's head, you find it indigo. Faded, but there. But a tiny whisper of the color you now hold in your gourd. You run a fingertip near the line, not touching, just close enough to feel the cool of the stone. Who painted this? How did they know the air would turn green to blue? What did they trade to get the dye? Back outside, the world is brighter, the light almost harsh. Your eyes crave shade. Blue does that, it ruins you for sun. You walk back slowly past bundles of drying bark, bundles of palm leaves dyed earlier in the week. Children are playing again, one of them wearing a crown made from indigo-dipped fiber, already fraying and staining their forehead like war paint. Another child offers you a stick dipped in crushed beetles and tree resin. For lips, she says matter-of-factly. You thank her, but politely decline. Back in your hut, you sketch a small image using only your newest blues. A bird maybe, or a hand reaching for the moon. Something simple, something quiet. You layer color over color, let it dry in stages. Indigo is a building pigment. It wants time. Each layer deepens the one before. You finish the night by placing your indigo gourd beside the others. The collection grows not just in color, but in weight, in meaning. These aren't just paints. They're recipes, arguments, trade routes, funerals, weddings, eclipses, plagues. They are history in paste form. And as you wash your brushes one last time, you realize something else. Every pigment here came from something that survived. Fire, rot, decay, pressure. Even blue, that elusive miracle, only blooms after fermentation and exposure. You dry your hands, stretch your back. Watch the last of the sun slip behind the hills like a smudged brushstroke. And you think maybe that's the real story of ancient Ethiopian paint. It isn't about what's colorful. It's about what refuses to fade. You wake to the sound of a hollow reed flute being played somewhere uphill. It's gentle, repetitive, almost lazy, like the musician is serenading the trees, or maybe just trying to keep a goat entertained. The air smells damp, like rain tried to visit in the night, but gave up halfway through. Your paints are dry. Your brushes are clean. And you, for the first time in days, feel rested. Today your goal is both practical and precious palm leaf manuscripts. You head toward the monastery on the ridge, a quiet place tucked behind thorny acacia trees, where the walls are made of stone and time. Here the priests still copy religious texts onto long strips of dried palm, using brushes carved from reeds and pigment ground in the very bowls you used 2 days ago. You've been invited to watch, but only if you promise not to talk. A fair bargain. Inside, the scribe sits cross-legged on a woven mat, a strip of polished palm leaf before him, curved slightly at the edges like a ship's hull. He's humming softly, probably a hymn, or maybe just his version of a to-do list. His brush is impossibly thin, and he's using soot black mixed with tree gum applied with a care that borders on obsession. The characters he paints are ancient Ge'ez script, angular and beautiful, each one like a tiny architectural feat. You lean in. The black lines shimmer slightly, still wet, and you marvel that such a dark, perfect color came from smoke and patience. He switches brushes. Now, a wider one. He dips it into red that looks suspiciously like the egg yolk ochre you made 2 days ago. He draws a border around the text, framing it like a holy whisper. The red dances, warm, alive. He dots the edge with yellow, then green. All of it from the earth or trees or cows or things once buried. No ink factory here. No barcode. Just pigments born from fire and faith. Historians still argue whether the use of color in Ethiopian manuscripts was symbolic, functional, or merely decorative. Some believe red was used to indicate divine speech. Others say it helped guide the eye across dense text. One theory, your favorite, is that it simply brought joy. That in the slow, grinding labor of copying scripture, color was the scribe's way of smiling. After the morning's copying, the scribe gestures for you to try. You hesitate, this is sacred work after all, but he insists. You kneel. The palm leaf feels strange under your fingers, smooth but fibrous, like the page is breathing. You dip the brush into black, tap off the excess, and try to write a single letter. It wobbles, wavers, bleeds a little. He chuckles. The page listens, he says. But only to calm hands. Fair. You try again. This time slower. The ink flows a little cleaner. The character forms more completely. You don't know what it means, maybe house or light or pot of lentils. But it feels good. Honest. Like an offering. Outside the sun has risen higher, and the village below glows faintly in the distance. You watch birds circle the trees, hear the hum of insects, and smell the unmistakable scent of crushed bark steeping in hot water nearby. After thanking the scribe, you head back to the village, stopping briefly to watch a group of women preparing more palm strips. They boil them first, then scrape them clean with shell fragments, lay them flat to dry, and finally rub them with stone to give a slight sheen. It's labor-intensive, but the result is a surface smoother than leather and far more enduring. You remember reading, or maybe someone told you, that some of these palm leaf texts have survived over 800 years. Ink clings to them like secrets. The colors faded, though they maybe still speak. Back at your hut, you replicate the process. You take a palm strip, write a single Ge'ez character in black, frame it in red, then add a yellow sunburst. Not perfect. Not even close. But meaningful. You place the strip beside your pigments, next to the bark sketches, the bone black samples, the indigo line. Your workspace now looks like a tiny museum, or a very confused cookbook. Later, as the day cools, you join a group of boys learning to make brushes. The instructor, a wiry man with expressive eyebrows, holds up a brush made from goat hair and bamboo. A good brush listens, he says. A bad one talks back. You test a few. Some are too soft, others too stiff. One feels just right, like holding the stem of a dandelion, light but focused. You carve a small handle into it and etch your mark at the end, a crescent and a dot. You try it with the soot-black, painting a spiral sun on your palm. It dries quickly, leaving a gentle shine. The boy next to you paints a goat badly. You both laugh. That evening, the village gathers for a small festival, not for you, but for the moon. It's a waxing half tonight, and tradition holds that you shouldn't begin any new paintings until the moon is full. So instead, there is singing, flatbread, and candles in clay bowls. You sit by the fire, watching the flicker of flame paint everyone in shades of amber and shadow. And you realize that even now, color is at work on skin, on faces, on cloth fluttering in the breeze. You think back to the palm leaf you wrote on, the scribe's calm hands, the soft squeak of brush on leaf, the way soot became scripture, and you wonder how many histories were written in colors no one ever named. You wake slowly, letting the warmth of the sun soak into your shoulders before opening your eyes. There's something special about this day, not in the calendar sense, but in the quiet way the air moves. Lighter somehow. Drier. Good weather for grinding. You set your mind to it. There's one pigment you've been meaning to revisit, one that plays a quiet but vital role in the grand color orchestra of ancient Ethiopia: white. Yes, white. The color of bone, of ash, of old clouds. Often overlooked but essential. Without it, nothing glows. Without it, contrast dies. Even the saints need halos, and halos need something to shine against. You walk out to a flat space where limestone is piled near a large grinding stone. Nearby, a boy is already at work, hammering chunks into smaller pieces with a rock wrapped in goat hide to soften the blow. You wave. He shrugs. Rock breaking is not glamorous work. The white pigment they make here is crushed from chalky stone, calcium carbonate if you're into chemistry. But here they just call it afursa, the dust that doesn't run. You help him break a few chunks, then take the smaller bits and start grinding. The stone squeals under the pressure and fine dust rises like mist. It coats your hands, your nostrils, your eyelashes. You sneeze. twice. The boy snorts with laughter and offers you a strip of cloth to wrap over your face. Historians still debate whether this white was used more for text backgrounds or figure highlights. Some frescoes seem to layer white under skin tones. Others reserve it for borders or clouds or halos. One theory is that it was symbolic of divine clarity, a visual breath of space in otherwise crowded compositions. You don't know. All you know is that this dust, once mixed with sap and egg white, becomes luminous. Once the powder is fine enough, you sift it through a reed screen, catching only the softest dust. You mix it with glare from yesterday's egg whites and stir gently with a stick of olive wood. The paste that forms is creamy, bright, and surprisingly thick. You paint a simple star on a slice of bark. The white dries almost immediately and feels cool to the touch, like touching stone that hasn't seen the sun in years. Not all whites are equal, though. You've heard of another variant, burnt bone white. It's made not by charring but by baking cleaned bones at low temperatures for hours. The result? A soft, dusty pigment with faint gray undertones. More subtle than chalk. Harder to mix but smoother to paint. You ask an elder if she's ever made it. She nods and leads you to a small pit oven behind her home, where bones from goats long past are being slowly cooked beneath a layer of ash and sand. The process is delicate. Too much heat, and the bones go black. Too little, and they crumble. She opens the pit with a long stick and lifts one carefully with tongs. It's pale, almost translucent. She lets it cool, then cracks it open and begins grinding. You help, and soon the powder in your hands is white with just the slightest whisper of gray. It reminds you of the sky at dawn, muted, thoughtful, not quite awake. You compare it with the chalk white paint. The chalk is louder. The bone is softer. Used together, they create texture. Layers. A push and pull between brightness and shadow. You test both on a sample panel, painting a simple bird in flight, white chalk on the wings, bone white on the body. It's subtle, but effective. The chalk reflects. The bone absorbs. Your fingers feel like they're learning a secret language spoken only by dust and water. Later that afternoon, a group of young girls invites you to join them as they decorate the inside of a low-domed hut, meant for a marriage ceremony. They're using every pigment you've seen so far. Red ochre for patterns, soot black for outlines, yellow from dried bark for suns and flowers, and white. Lots of white. It's painted in dots and circles around handprints and across the ceiling in sweeping lines like shooting stars. One girl shows you how to flick a brush so the white splatters like snow. Another uses her fingers to smear it into the shape of birds. They laugh and chatter, teasing each other about future husbands and whether this hut will actually hold up through the rainy season. You ask where the idea for the stars came from. My grandmother saw them in a dream, one girl says. You believe her. Because here, paint doesn't just decorate. It remembers. Dreams, births, burials, blessings. Every pigment, every color carries a whisper from someone long gone. You walk home that evening, tired but filled. The sun hangs low, turning the sky from gold to slate. Your hands are covered in pale dust, and even your eyelashes wear a fine shimmer of white. You catch your reflection in a bowl of still water. You look like you've aged 20 years, or maybe just earned them. Back at your hut, you line up both white paints in their gourds and label them with tiny symbols. A circle for chalk, a crescent for bone. You sit cross-legged, brush in hand, and paint the outline of a new mural, just the faintest sketch. A river, some hills, the curl of smoke. All in white. For now, you wake in the middle of the night to the sound of distant thunder. Not loud, but steady, like someone rolling heavy barrels across the sky. You lie there for a while, watching the ceiling shift with moonlight and wind, listening to the village breathe. Every now and then a dog barks once and thinks better of it. The rain never comes, but the storm left behind a gift, the smell of damp earth. You rise before sunrise, drawn to that scent. Not just because it's pleasant, though it is, but because it means the clay banks at the edge of the old riverbed are soft again. That's where you're headed today. Not for pigment this time, but for kaolin, a smooth, light-colored clay that's perfect for underpainting, polishing parchment, and preparing surfaces for more brilliant colors. You take the path east, winding past the goat pens, the fig trees, and a patch of wildflowers still half asleep. The riverbed is mostly dry now, its water diverted long ago, but the banks hold onto moisture like memory. You dig gently with a curved stick, revealing layers of pale buttery clay. It feels cool and slightly slick like wet flour. This isn't paint. Not yet. But it's part of the process. You gather a small bundle in a gourd, wrapping it in damp cloth to keep it pliable. On your way back, you pass a man kneeling in front of a large wooden shield. He's painting it with a mix of red ochre and what looks like egg yolk and ash. The design is geometric sharp triangles, a central circle, and curling lines like smoke. He invites you to watch. Shield painting, he explains, isn't decorative. It's language. The patterns speak of tribe, of lineage, of which ancestor you'd like watching your back. The red, he tells you, comes from the same clay you gathered days ago. The binder is blood goat, not human, and the ash is from a sacred fire burned only during new moons. He paints with slow confidence, dipping a stiff brush made of coarse plant fiber into his mix. You ask him about the curling lines. Rain, he says. But also teeth. Depends who's looking. You think about that on the walk back. How every symbol here lives at least two lives. How color isn't just about aesthetics but about meaning, safety, threat, hope. How a swirl of ochre might be a river or a warning. Back at your hut, you prepare the kaolin by sieving it through a reed mat, then drying it slightly in the sun. It lightens as it dries, becoming pale gray, then almost white. You mix a small amount with tree sap and a bit of old egg yolk to make a thin, creamy primer. This primer won't be seen in the finished piece. It's invisible. But it makes everything else easier. Paints glide better, binders set more evenly, colors glow more vividly. You brush it onto a new panel, smooth, slow strokes, letting it sink in. Once dry, the surface feels soft, almost powdery. Like an invitation. Then you begin layering color, red over white, then a mix of yellow and soot, then blue for the sky. You notice how differently the pigments behave on this surface. The indigo sings louder. The red spreads smoother. Even the bone black lines curve more willingly. As you work, a group of children gathers to watch. One asks if the river you're painting is real. It was, you say. Did you see it? No, you admit. But the clay remembers. He nods solemnly. Clay remembers everything, especially feet. He's right, you realize. The river may be gone, but the colors it left behind remain. In pots, in paintings, in thumbprints on walls. Later you join the elders near the cooking hearth, sharing roasted grain and sour milk, listening to stories. One woman tells a tale about a time when the earth ran out of color, and everyone had to speak in whispers so as not to disturb the silence. A child asks how they got the colors back. The woman smiles. They crushed stone, burned bones, waited, and then they sang. You wonder if that's what you've been doing all along, singing with dirt. As evening falls, you work on your panel by firelight. The colors shift again, softer, deeper, warmer. The red turns rust. The blue darkens to ink. Even the white glows faintly like a breath on glass. You add a few final details, a goat on a hill, a line of birds flying low, a hand reaching toward the sun. Then you sit back and just look. Not for approval, not for critique, just to be with the thing you made. A thing of fire, earth, patience, and time. A thing that, like all good things, began as dust. The next day greets you with a crispness in the air, the kind that makes shadows look sharper and the sky feel just a bit higher. You stretch, pop your back like a sack of gravel, and squint toward the hills. Today feels like a green day. Not in mood, but in pigment. Green is rare in this landscape, at least naturally. The soil favors reds, yellows, browns, and grays. But green, that's a trickster. It doesn't come easy. You don't dig for it. You coax it sometimes from plants, sometimes from metal. Your first stop is a grove of false banana trees. Not real bananas, these are leafy giants with no fruit but plenty of stories. Beneath their roots, hidden in the black soil, grows a creeping vine with bitter leaves. The locals use the juice for medicine, and sometimes for pigment. You meet a woman boiling the leaves in a clay pot over a slow fire. The air smells bitter vegetal like overcooked spinach and rainwater. She adds ashes to the mixture and the green brightens faintly but enough to notice. You ask what it's called. She grins. Stomach relief. Also wall paint. Depends how you use it. Historians still debate whether early Ethiopian greens were made entirely from plant-based sources, or if copper imported or scavenged was used to create mineral greens. Some argue that certain frescoes in the Tigrian highlands show chemical reactions consistent with copper verdigris. Others insist it's all plant dye and wishful thinking. You're about to see for yourself. She strains the plant mixture through a mesh of woven reeds and gives you a small bowl of the thick green liquid. It's muddy, more olive than emerald, but you stir it gently with some gum binder and test it on a bark strip. The result is subtle, earthy, faded like the first sprout in dry soil. You can see why it wasn't used often, but where it appears, it stands out like a whispered secret. Later you visit a blacksmith on the village edge. His forge is little more than a pit, a bellows made from goatskin and a pile of scrap. He mostly makes knives, hinges, and the occasional ceremonial spear. But you're not here for weapons. You're here for rust. Specifically copper scrap. He chuckles when you explain your goal. You want to make color from old pipe. Yes, you say. Green. He rummages through a pile and pulls out a battered copper ring, then sets it in a small dish with vinegar, salt, and a few crushed herbs. He adds a splash of stale beer for good luck. Now we wait. The chemical reaction takes hours or days if done properly, but you cheat a little. He shows you a shortcut: gentle heating over a low coal bed. Within an hour, a thin film of blue-green crystals begins forming on the copper. He scrapes them carefully, mixes the powder with honey, and hands you the paste. Verdigris. You test it on a smooth bit of parchment. The result is startling. Finally, a real green. Not olive, not muddy, but bright, almost luminous, like crushed jade or peacock feather tips. It's fragile though. The pigment flakes if applied too thick. It doesn't like humidity. It sulks under too much light. You paint it on, gently layering thin washes over bone white until it settles into something rich but soft. You think of the murals in old churches, faded now, but some of the robes and trees have traces of this very green. How many copper rings did it take to color those saints? Back in your hut, you add both greens to your collection: plant-based olive and copper-born emerald. Two faces of the same illusion. One alive, one alchemical. As the sun sets, you sketch a simple image of a hillside, dotted with trees, layering the greens carefully to mimic light and shadow. Above it, you add a goat with an indigo eye and a red collar. The scene looks almost modern: simple lines, balanced tones, and a color harmony that surprises you. A child peeks over your shoulder. Why is the goat in the tree? It's not, you say. It's just walking uphill. He frowns. Still looks like a tree goat. Fair enough. Later you help your neighbor prepare bark for dye. The bark is rough reddish-brown and comes from a tree whose name translates roughly to the one that makes teeth hurt. You soak it overnight in water mixed with ash, and in the morning the solution turns a strange tea-like orange. Not useful on its own, but when added to bone black it softens. Adds warmth. You're learning that every color is also a relationship. A dance between base and binder, between source and surface. Nothing stands alone. That night you can't sleep. You light a tiny oil lamp and pull out all your test strips. Laying them side by side, you see the story you've been building: red from rusted clay, black from bone and fire, white from chalk and ash, yellow from cows, and bark blue from fermented leaves, green from copper and boiled vines. It's a spectrum not just of color, but of labor, of curiosity, of time. You close your eyes and picture your paints not as pigments, but as voices. Each one with its own tone, its own temper, its own past. And somewhere in the dark you whisper thanks, not to the paints, to the earth that gave them. Morning finds you covered in smudges again. Green on your thumb, white across your forearm, a bit of indigo streaking your hair like a forgotten ribbon. You look like someone who lost a very elegant fight with a rainbow. But it's fine. The day's already warm, and the village smells like bread baking in clay ovens, and clay itself drying in the sun. You stretch, yawn, and decide it's time to get philosophical. Because today's question is one even the elders don't always agree on. When did it all begin? When did the first hand press into pigment and smear it on a wall? When did someone stop just looking at the earth and start talking to it in color? You've seen the murals. You've touched the pigments. But now you head toward the hills where the oldest signs of paint live, not in temples or books, but in caves. A short walk from the village, half hidden behind acacia trees and boulders, lies a shallow cave mouth. You duck inside and the air changes instantly. Cooler. Still, like the cave is holding its breath. And on the walls, faint but unmistakable, there are paintings. Cattle mostly. Long-horned, delicate, drawn with soft strokes of red and yellow. Some human figures too, arms raised, feet lifted mid-step. One seems to be dancing. Another is holding what might be a staff. Or maybe a flute. No one knows exactly how old these are. Some archaeologists estimate several thousand years. Others say longer. There's no way to date the paint itself precisely, only the layers around it. The pigments, likely ochre, charcoal ash. The binders, probably fat sap spit. Historians still argue whether these paintings were purely decorative, ritualistic, or even part of early record-keeping. Some believe they marked seasonal migrations, others that they honored spirits or ancestors. You stand quietly, fingers resting lightly on the cool stone. There's a kind of hush here that makes you feel like you're intruding, like the walls could speak, if they weren't so tired from holding all these secrets. You pull a small notebook from your satchel, just a folded bark sheet, and try to copy one of the figures. It's harder than you expect. The lines are deceptively simple, but they carry rhythm, proportion, movement. Your first attempt looks like a dancing spoon. You try again. Better. You sit for a while sketching, listening to the occasional rustle outside. A lizard skitters past your foot. Somewhere a bird lets out a sleepy cough. The past and the present blend here. You're not sure which version of yourself is holding the charcoal stub. Eventually, you return to the village, your sketches in hand, your knees dusty. You stop by the elder's home, the same one who taught you about bone pigment. She's grinding something with a rhythm like a heartbeat. You show her the sketches. She nods. That one's a flute. You smile. How do you know I dreamed it once? Fair enough. You sit with her for a while, helping her prepare red pigment for a ritual mural being restored in the church. She adds a touch of honey to the ochre, then something unexpected, crushed flower petals. Not for color, they vanish in the mix, but for scent. It helps the hands remember what they're doing, she says. You wonder if the cave painters had tricks like that. If one of them carried a lucky seed or always painted after eating flatbread. If they argued over who got to outline the cattle horns. If they laughed. That evening you return to your workspace and pin your cave-inspired sketches to the wall. You recreate one of the dancing figures using red ochre and ash gray, adding soft highlights with chalk white. You don't try to improve it. You let the ancient shape speak. You begin thinking more seriously now about your palette as a whole. What it means, not just technically, but emotionally. Red is blood and sunset and courage. Black is shadow, memory and silence. White is space, breath and mourning. Yellow is warmth, belly, laughter, sun in your water pot. Blue is longing. Green is healing. Gray is the in-between. Every color has a life and a death. Because pigments don't last forever. Frescoes fade, manuscripts crumble, walls collapse. But for a while, maybe even centuries, they hold on. And that's enough. You close your paints and place your brush to rest in its reed holder. Outside, someone is humming an old song. A baby cries once, then stops. The fire pits glow softly, casting shadows that flicker like stories trying to escape. You sit still, letting your thoughts slow to the rhythm of village night. And you whisper to yourself, not quite a prayer, not quite a promise. You wake with a stiff neck and a smudge of red pigment across your cheek, evidence of last night's unplanned nap beside your paint samples. There's still a brush stuck in your hair. You leave it there. It feels like a badge of honor at this point. Today, you're finally ready for something you've been putting off gilding. Not with gold, real gold is too scarce for everyday use here, but with mica and powdered stone that shimmers like metal under the right light. The Highland churches often feature halos and robes that glint in sunlight made from this very material. You've seen it on the old saints' icons, the glimmer around their heads like they were drawn with fire. You head up a stony ridge where the mica lives. The villagers call it sunstone, and you can see why. Even the broken fragments catch the light and scatter it like sugar on slate. You kneel beside a fissure in the rock, carefully loosening flakes with a bone pick. The mica splits easily, almost like peeling thin bark. Layer after layer, you gather translucent sheets, some as thin as onion skin, others thicker with a soft golden shimmer. You hold one to the light and smile. It's like capturing sunrise in a sliver. Historians still argue whether ancient Ethiopian artists used mica intentionally for shimmer, or simply mixed it into wall plaster for structural reasons. But anyone who's stood before a fresco as the evening sun hits, it knows the truth. That glitter. It was no accident. You return to the village and bring your haul to the pigment master's hut. He shows you how to crush the mica gently, not with the grinding stones, but between soft cloth and smooth river pebbles. Too much pressure and it turns to dust. You want it flaky, not mushy. Just enough to sparkle without clumping. You mix a bit with honey and fig sap. It becomes a thick, grainy paste, useless for line work, but perfect for accents. You test a streak over bone white and gasp. It catches the light even inside your shaded hut, glowing softly like fire trapped under skin. You try it again, this time on a border frame around your palm leaf manuscript copy. Tiny dots. Careful swirls. You don't need much. Just enough to hint at something celestial. Later, a young girl brings you a wooden crossplane, old, worn, smooth from handling. Make it shine, she says. So you do. You add mica highlights to the arms of the cross, ring its center with dots of ash gray and red ochre, then gild the edges lightly. When you're done, she stares at it for a long time. It looks happy now, she says. You've never thought of wood as capable of moods, but she's right. That afternoon, you explore the old granary near the western hill. It's mostly abandoned now, save for birds and dust, but one corner still holds faded murals. You kneel, peering close. There, beneath a layer of soot and mold, you see faint shimmer. Mica, still holding on. You touch the stone gently. You can't read the original shapes anymore, but the sparkle remains. Like breath still clinging to the world long after the voice is gone. You return to the hut and begin working on a larger piece, a small altar panel you've been assembling for days. It's not a masterpiece. It's practice. But today you lay down the final layer, a spiral sun ringed with lines of gold mica, surrounded by a sky of indigo and soot black. You mix red and bone to paint two hands reaching upward, fingertips stained with color. You don't know what the panel means yet. But it feels like the thing you've been working toward this whole time, not a painting, but a conversation between fire, earth, and memory. As evening falls, a dust storm skirts the horizon. Not a full one, just a curtain of wind and dry leaves passing through like a guest with no plans to linger. You seal up your pigments and cover your tools, At dinner, the elders tell stories of a time when colors vanished from the world after a great wind stole them. For years, they say everything was gray. People forgot red, forgot green. Until one day, a child found a blue stone and painted the sky back into existence. Is that true, you ask? The storyteller shrugs. No, but it should be. You sleep that night beside your mica dreaming of light trapped in stone and saints with sparkling eyes. And just before sleep takes you a thought, maybe not all pigments come from Earth. Some come from stars. By now your fingers are permanently stained. Your nails hold tiny secrets, ochre in the creases, indigo under the edges, a shimmer of mica that no scrubbing seems to remove. You've stopped trying. You belong to the colors now. The morning is cool, the kind of cool that invites thought, not action. So instead of heading straight to the grindstone or the brush, you sit beneath the big fig tree and watch the village stretch awake. Someone singing, low, tuneless, but full of rhythm. Today's project is different. Less about pigment, more about people. You've decided to visit the one person whose walls are colorless. A woman who lives near the edge of the village in a house the color of ash. You've passed it many times, noticed the bare walls, the empty courtyard, the unpainted door. No patterns, no murals, just stone and silence. When you arrive, she's peeling roots beside a clay stove. She nods at you, says nothing. You sit. Quietly. Wait. After a while she speaks. You're the one who paints goats in the sky. You smile. Only by accident. She hands you a root. Peel. You do. It's a soft fibrous thing used for dye when boiled long enough. She knows that, of course. You're not here to teach her anything. You're here to ask. Why no color, you finally say. She shrugs. Not everyone needs it. Some people see too much already. You don't push further. Instead, you offer her a gift, a small strip of palm leaf painted with soot black bone white, and the lightest touch of mica along one edge. It catches the light like breath. She holds it up, studies it, then places it gently on a shelf inside beside a bowl of dried herbs and a rock shaped like a sleeping bird. That's enough, she says. One color at a time. You walk away quietly, strangely moved. Not every story needs a mural. Not every wall needs to sing. Back at your hut, you feel the itch return, the urge to paint, to grind, to mix, to layer. But instead, you pull out your collection and just look. Each pigment now feels like a character in its own right. You could almost give them names. Red is the loud one, the story shouter. Black is the watcher, the quiet historian. White is the space between thoughts. Yellow, the child running barefoot. Blue is longing and distance. Green is the healer. And mica is laughter caught in glass. You sort through your gourds and bowls, your bark sheets and palm panels, and begin arranging them into a kind of visual journal. Each one tells not just a story, but your story, where you found the pigment, who taught you how to bind it, what you ruined with it first. You find the first test swipe of bone black, the one that smeared horribly. You keep it. You find the thumbprint of ash gray where you sneezed mid-brush. You keep that too. In the afternoon, a boy brings you a cracked pot and asks if you can make it less boring. You ask what he means. He says, I want it to look like thunder. So you take charcoal black and ash white, swirl them together into a stormy gray. You smear it across the pot in rings, then drag a feather through it. The result is jagged, raw, streaked. Now it looks angry, he says, pleased. A few hours later, a woman asks for red dots across her doorway. Protective marks, she says. Keeps the spirits confused. You oblige, mixing a quick ochre paste with egg yolk and flicking the dots in a neat pattern. They dry fast, catching the evening light like tiny eyes. You realize that more and more people have started asking you for color. Not lessons, not murals, just marks, touches, tiny bursts of meaning on otherwise silent surfaces. And you realize something else: you're no longer just practicing. You're part of it now. The village's memory in paste and line. That evening, the pigment master comes to visit. He brings nothing, says little, sits beside you under the fig tree. Together, you watch the last of the daylight fade. After a long silence, he says, "You've made good dust." You grin. "Tastes better than it looks." He chuckles, then hands you a tiny pouch made of woven reed. Inside a stone. Smooth. Pinkish. Heavy for its size. "You'll know what to do with it," he says, then leaves. You don't yet. But that's fine. You turn the stone over in your hand. It's cool. Silky. Mysterious. And tomorrow you'll crush it. Carefully. Lovingly. And see what color sings. You wake with the stone still in your hand, its cool weight nestled against your palm like it never left. The pink mineral glints faintly in the early light, soft, not flashy. Quietly confident. You roll it between your fingers, wondering what it will become. It doesn't feel like red. Not like ochre. Not as warm. It might be a blush. A sigh. A memory of red long cooled. You set up your grinding area outside today. The sun's soft filtered through a thin veil of clouds. The perfect light for pigment work. Too much sun and everything dries too fast. Too little and it stays tacky. You wrap the pink stone in cloth and begin tapping it gently with a smaller stone, just enough to crack it. It resists at first. Denser than chalk. Heavier than it looks. But after a few steady taps it splits. Inside the color deepens. A dusty rose. The kind of shade you'd find on faded wedding cloth or dried hibiscus petals. You grind it slowly, carefully. This one's special. You can feel it. As the powder builds, you mix a pinch with gum arabic and water. It swirls into a pale pink with just the slightest shimmer, more elegant than dramatic. You test it on parchment, brushing a single curved line. It dries beautifully. Soft, muted, gentle. You smile. You didn't know you needed this color. But now that it's here, you can't imagine the palette without it. Historians still debate whether colors like this soft pink, subtle violets were common in ancient Ethiopian art, or reserved for specific uses. Some believe they faded over time, washed out by sun and smoke. Others think they were never widely used at all, seen as too delicate or expensive to produce. You sit back and watch the pink line dry. It reminds you of morning light on the hills, of hands folded in quiet, of names forgotten, but not unloved. Later that morning, you hear laughter from the courtyard. A group of children are playing a game that involves throwing pebbles into painted circles. You recognize the circles, ones you painted last week using leftover red and yellow on a flat slab of stone. One of the girls points at the circles. "Make a new one," she demands. "What color?" you ask. She thinks. "Something happy." You fetch the new pink and paint a wide spiral next to the others. They gather around as it dries, murmuring approval. "It looks like cheeks," one says. "Like pomegranate skin," says another. You wonder how many ways a color can be described without ever using its name. In the afternoon, the monk scribe invites you to the monastery again. This time, not just to watch, but to help restore a faded page. It's an old manuscript, the leather brittle, the ink flaking. He points to a margin where the decoration has nearly vanished. You recognize the pattern. Triangles, vines, the outline of what may have once been a halo. He hands you a reed pen and a bit of soot ink. You trace gently, filling in the missing lines. When you reach the faded flower at the corner, you hesitate. The original color's gone, just a faint outline remaining. The monk nods toward your pouch. "Use the pink." You blink. "Are you sure?" He shrugs. "It's time." So you dip your brush into the soft rose pigment and fill in the flower petal by petal. When it's done, it doesn't look flashy. It doesn't look new. It looks right. You realize then that restoration is not about redoing. It's about listening. Asking what a wall, a book, a face used to be. and gently helping it return not to perfection, but to presence. That evening you return home and sit outside with your pigments. The wind picks up soft and dry, stirring your parchment samples, and carrying the scent of eucalyptus and something cooking with onions. You arrange your bowls in a circle: red, black, white, yellow, blue, green, ash, bone, mica, and now pink. You think about how far each one traveled to get here. Not just in distance, but in effort. Red had to be ground from rust. Black had to be coaxed from fire. White had to fall gently from stone. Yellow fermented in bark and belly. Blue fermented in secret. Green tricked you into thinking it didn't exist. And pink waited for you to be ready. You paint a final image for the day. A simple hill, a single figure at the top, arms lifted as if catching the wind. You shade the sky with pink and gray, let the colors blend like twilight. And then you stop. No finishing touches, no extra dots. You just let it be. You close your paints, wash your brushes, fold your hands, and in the last light of day, you whisper to the colors, you've done enough for now. The next morning, you find yourself drawn to the small garden behind the village, where herbs and flowers grow wild and untamed. It's a quiet place, fragrant with mint and wild thyme, where the sunlight filters through leaves in mottled patterns, and bees hum lazily as they wander from blossom to blossom. You breathe deeply, savoring the green, the life, the subtle energy of growing things. Today you want to explore something different. Natural dyes extracted from plants and insects. Those fragile, fleeting colors that don't come from earth or fire, but from living, breathing things. You find a cluster of women gathered around a low wooden table strewn with leaves, berries, and pots of boiling water. They're preparing a dye bath, simmering crushed indigo leaves in large clay vessels. The steam rises in gentle clouds, carrying the faint scent of fermentation and grass. One woman catches your eye and beckons you closer. She hands you a small handful of crushed cochineal insects, a bright red powder made from beetles long crushed and dried. It's surprising how something so tiny can yield such a vibrant color, a pigment prized across continents and centuries. You watch as they dissolve the cochineal powder into hot water, adding vinegar and a pinch of salt to fix the dye. The liquid turns a deep crimson, like fresh blood diluted with morning dew. You dip a strip of fabric into the bath, then lift it slowly, watching the color soak in. It deepens as it dries, rich and glowing. You ask about other dyes. Nearby, another pot bubbles with crushed pomegranate rind, creating a golden yellow, while boiled walnut shells produce a deep brown. The women explain which plants create which colors and how these dyes are used for coloring fabric and hair, but sometimes for temporary body paint during festivals. Historians still debate whether these dyes were used in permanent artwork or reserved mostly for textiles and ceremonies. Some argue that fabric dyes were the earliest form of personal expression before wall paintings. Others say the two evolved side by side, influencing each other over centuries. You take a small piece of cloth dyed with cochineal and press it to your cheek. The color stains faintly, a gentle reminder of life's impermanence and beauty. Later you stroll through the village market, where bundles of dried herbs and flowers hang from stalls. The colors here are muted but no less meaningful. You barter for some madder root, a plant known to produce deep reds, and carefully tuck it into your pouch. Back at your hut, you experiment, boiling small batches of plant material, steeping, straining, and testing on different surfaces. The colors vary depending on water heat and binder, sometimes surprising you with their depth or subtlety. You think about how color in this world is never fixed, always changing with time, context, and use. It's alive like everything else. As evening falls, you step outside with your latest creations. The sky burns orange and pink as the sun sets behind the hills. You smear a little of the pomegranate yellow on your hand and watch it catch the fading light. It feels like holding a piece of the sun itself. You smile softly. The journey is far from over, but you're beginning to understand that color is more than pigment, it's connection. Between earth and fire, between past and present, between you and the world. The morning air is crisp with the promise of rain, the kind of dampness that makes every leaf and stone feel alive. You decide to visit the communal kiln on the outskirts of the village, a place where pottery is fired, bricks baked, and sometimes pigments fixed. It's a ritual place where earth fire and human hands come together in a perfect fleeting balance. The kiln is a large dome-shaped structure made from mud and straw. Inside, coals smolder, throwing a faint orange glow through cracks in the walls. A potter tends the fire carefully, adding sticks and watching the temperature. You can feel the heat radiating even from a few steps away. You ask about the firing process and its connection to pigment. The potter explains that many pigments need heat to bind properly to their surfaces, especially those used on ceramics and murals. Firing not only hardens the clay, but also alters the pigment's chemistry, deepening reds, brightening yellows, and sometimes muting colors altogether. You watch as a freshly painted pot is placed into the kiln. Its surface adorned with ochre and bone black looks fragile, but the potter assures you it will come out stronger, its colors fused to the clay. Historians still argue about the exact temperatures ancient Ethiopian kilns reached, and how those temperatures affected pigment stability. Some suggest early kilns could reach up to 1000 degrees Celsius, enough to vitrify pottery and permanently fix pigments. Others believe most pigment application happened after firing, limiting color longevity. You decide to test this yourself. You paint small tiles with your various pigments, red ochre bone, black yellow bark dye, and even your precious pink, and prepare to fire them in a small makeshift kiln. The potter helps you build a fire pit with stones and straw, and you carefully place your tiles inside, covering them with more straw and earth to trap heat. The fire roars to life, smoke curling upward in lazy spirals. As the flames subside, you wait, watching embers glow and fade, the night settling around you like a soft blanket. When the tiles are cool enough, you retrieve them carefully. The red ochre has deepened to a warm rust. The bone black remains sharp and matte. The yellow bark dye has faded slightly, losing some brightness. And the pink, surprisingly, has mellowed into a soft blush. You touch each tile, amazed at how fire has transformed them, making pigments both more permanent and more delicate. You realize the kiln is not just a furnace but a storyteller, one that writes history in color and clay. That night, as you sit by the fire, you ponder the journey of pigments, from earth and bone to leaf and insect, from stone to flame, from simple dust to enduring art. You understand now that ancient Ethiopian paint is more than color. It's alchemy, patience, and memory baked together in fire. You close your eyes and let the warmth of the fire and the glow of your pigments carry you gently into sleep. The day greets you with a gentle breeze that rustles the dry grasses and carries the faint scent of smoke and wildflowers. You decide to visit the village healer, a woman known for her knowledge of plants, rituals, and the delicate balance between body and spirit. Her hut sits at the edge of the village, surrounded by bundles of dried herbs hanging from rafters and pots filled with strange mixtures, bubbling softly. You enter quietly, greeted by the warm aroma of incense and honey. She smiles and invites you to sit. On a low table rests an assortment of pigments and dyes, some familiar, others new to you. She explains how many of these colors are used not just for art, but for healing and protection. One pigment catches your eye, a deep earthy red derived from a mixture of ochre and powdered roots, used in poultices and ritual markings to ward off illness. She gently brushes it on her own arm, tracing symbols with reverence. Historians still argue whether such medicinal pigments were common or reserved for shamans and priests. Some believe their use was widespread, woven into daily life. Others think they were secret, sacred knowledge passed down quietly. You watch as she prepares a paste from crushed herbs and yellow clay. The mixture is sticky, fragrant, and warm to the touch. She explains it's used to soothe fevers and purify wounds. Curious, you ask about the connection between color and spirit. She tells you that in her culture, colors are alive. They carry energy that can heal or harm depending on how they're used. You feel a shift in your understanding. Paint is not just decoration. It's medicine, magic, and meaning. Later, you follow her instructions to gather certain plants, carefully picking leaves and flowers, mindful of seasons and cycles. Back at your hut, you prepare your own healing pigment, blending red ochre with crushed herbs and a drop of honey. You test it on a small patch of skin. It feels cool and grounding. You imagine how ancient artists might have combined art and healing in a single brushstroke. As evening falls, you sit beneath the stars, the faint glow of your pigments catching the firelight. The village hums softly around you, life, color, and spirit intertwined. And you realize your journey is as much about connection as it is about paint. The morning sun filters through the dusty air, warming your skin as you make your way toward the riverbed. You carry a woven basket, hoping to find more clues in the sediments and stones, something that might add new shades to your growing palette. Along the banks, you notice the smooth, water-worn rocks glinting in the light. Some are flecked with reds and yellows. Others shimmer faintly with mica-like particles. You pause to gather a handful of small stones, each a potential source of pigment. Nearby, a group of children plays, dipping sticks into the muddy water and drawing lines in the damp earth. Their laughter rings out, carrying a timeless joy. You watch them, thinking about how color and creativity are so deeply linked, how even the simplest mark can hold meaning. Historians still debate how ancient Ethiopian artists sourced and transported their pigments. Some argue that communities traded rare minerals, traveling long distances. Others suggest most pigments were local, their meanings tied to the land itself. You decide to test a few of your new finds. Back at your hut, you crush the stones against a grinding slab, revealing subtle shades of purple and orange beneath the rough exteriors. Mixing these with binders, egg white, sap, and resin, you paint test strokes on bark and limestone. One mixture yields a delicate lavender, another a burnt sienna with hints of rose. You marvel at how the earth continues to surprise you, revealing hidden colors in the most unlikely places. As afternoon turns to evening, you stroll toward the village center, where elders gather to share stories and songs. They speak of ancestors, of migrations, of rituals tied to the seasons and the land. You listen, sensing the deep connection between these tales and the colors you've been learning to coax from the earth. In the fading light, you paint a small panel inspired by the river's hues, a blend of purples, reds, and golds, swirling like water under the sun. You set it aside to dry, feeling a profound sense of gratitude. This journey through color has become a journey through history, culture, and spirit. You look up at the stars beginning to twinkle overhead, knowing there are still many pigments left to discover. But for now, the night is yours. The village stirs in the pre-dawn quiet, a world painted in blue-gray and muted shadows. You rise early, driven by curiosity and something softer, a sense that color is never just a thing but a message. Today you find yourself drawn to the church near the edge of the settlement, where bells ring out and walls glow with the faded stories of saints, angels, and martyrs. Inside, it's cool and dim. The stone breathes with centuries of incense and prayers. You run your hand lightly along the painted walls, feeling the gentle bumps and grooves where pigment clings to ancient plaster. Red halos, green palm fronds, robes outlined in black halos and borders, picked out in shimmering mica and soft bone white. A priest enters, nods, and lets you observe as he prepares for a service. He explains almost absently how each color here holds meaning. Green for hope and saints, red for martyrdom and sacrifice, yellow for divine light, black for humility, white for purity and angels. The blues and purples, reserved for the most sacred figures, are the rarest of all. You watch as he touches up a mural, adding a line of gold around a saint's robe. His brush is made from a single lock of horsehair tied to a slender twig. The pigment, a mixture of ochre, egg yolk, and mica, shines even in the dimness, catching and holding the light. Historians still debate whether these color codes were established by tradition, by religious law, or simply by the availability of pigment. Some say the meanings have shifted over centuries, with saints once painted in green, now cloaked in blue or white, depending on the village or the age. You're allowed to help restore a tiny section of border, just a slim line of red ochre around the edge of a painted palm leaf. It feels ceremonial, careful. You find your hand steadier than usual, as if the gravity of the place steadies you. You ask the priest about the faded figures. Do you remember who they are? You whisper. He shrugs. Some yes, some no. The colors remember for us. That thought lingers with you as you walk back into the sun. You think about all the codes, the meanings, the rules carried through time, not written in books, but in color. Not always remembered by name, but never truly lost. Later you find a quiet corner to sketch, testing new combinations inspired by the murals. Red next to green, blue under gold. A halo of mica, above a figure drawn in simple bone black. You try your own hand at inventing a code. What does orange mean? What does pink whisper? You decide orange is for new beginnings. Pink is for hope that hasn't spoken its name yet. As the day cools, you return once more to your pigments, seeing them differently now. Not just as materials, but as a language, a way to remember, to mourn, to bless, to invite joy. You promise yourself to carry these meanings forward in every mark you make. You close your paints for the night, the echoes of color and song lingering in the quiet, and let sleep come softly, painted in gentle shades. You wake to a rumble of distant thunder, the promise of rain hovering at the edge of the horizon. The air is thick and fragrant, earth and wild basil, the after-smell of last night's cookfires. You stretch, wander outside, and watch as the village comes to life. Today the world feels restless, full of energy, as if the colors themselves are waiting for something. You decide to climb the rocky slope behind the village, drawn by stories of an old ruined chapel. The path is slick in places, red mud clinging to your sandals and grass brushing at your calves. When you reach the top, you stand for a moment, catching your breath, looking back at the valley, a patchwork of green and gold dotted with shadows. The chapel is a weathered stone shell. Its roof has long since collapsed, and most of the frescoes have faded beneath centuries of wind, sun, and rain. Still, as you step inside, you spot traces of pigment on the walls, a wash of ochre, the outline of a hand, a streak of violet near the ceiling. You run your fingers over the remnants. Even after centuries, the colors linger, ghosts of their former brilliance. You wonder how many hands worked here, how many pigments were mixed and painted and lost to time. Historians still argue whether ancient pigments were chosen for beauty, meaning, or resilience. Some think certain minerals were selected precisely because they outlasted all else, leaving messages for those yet to come. Others believe beauty itself was a kind of resistance, a refusal to let the world be drab, even if only for a moment. You kneel and study the floor, where patches of color collect in low spots. The rain, when it comes, will carry some away, grind. Others, deeper into cracks, erase more stories. Yet somehow, not everything washes away. A line of black, a spot of yellow, a single red fingerprint remain. You take out a strip of parchment and do a quick sketch, just the suggestion of what once was. You feel a strange kinship with the forgotten artists who painted here. You too are trying to capture something that will fade. Later, as the rain finally arrives, you hurry back downhill, sheltering beneath an old fig tree. The drops are fat and cool, and they make the colors of the world bloom for a brief, bright moment. The grass glows, the mud shines, even the faded chapel walls seem to pulse with new life. Back in your hut, you lay your damp sketch out to dry and listen to the patter of rain on the roof. You realize how much of art, of life, is impermanence. The colors you mix, the marks you make, are always at the mercy of time and weather. But something always lingers, even in ruins, even in memory. That evening, when the storm passes, you step outside to find a rainbow arched across the sky, a fleeting spectrum, pure and bright, before it too fades. You laugh, grateful for every color that survives and every one that doesn't. By now, the routine of mixing, grinding, painting, and waiting has become as natural to you as breathing. You move through the village with color on your mind, under your fingernails, and in the crease of your elbow. People greet you not just by name, but by the latest shade streaking your skin. Red this week. Did you find more blue? The children call you the color keeper, which makes you grin every time. This morning you set out to visit one of the younger artists, a man with a sharp wit and a collection of new ideas about old things. He greets you at the edge of his family's garden, a goat nibbling at his tunic, and invites you to see his newest creation. He's painting a series of wooden boards using every pigment he can find, both traditional and experimental. Ochre sootbone, black verdigris, cochineal, some even mixed with a few pinches of imported pigment from the market down the valley. His strokes are bold and quick, but his process is careful, and his laughter is infectious. You sit beside him and compare samples, both of you marveling at how a slight change in binder or the order of layering can alter a color entirely. You share tips and trade stories, like the time you both nearly ruined a mural by mixing egg yolk and honey in the wrong order, resulting in a sticky disaster the ants still talk about. Historians still argue whether modern Ethiopian artists have lost the secrets of their ancestors, or if every generation simply rediscovers the old magic in new ways. Some say tradition is eroding under the flood of imported goods. Others insist there is always someone willing to dig, to grind, to learn. As you watch, he adds a splash of pink, your pink, to a corner of the board. It blends with the green, and together they create a surprising gentle brown. You laugh at how unexpected it is how color finds its own path. He shows you a brush he's made from bundled horsehair and a hollow reed. My grandfather used the same kind, he says, but I made the handle longer. My hands are bigger. He hands it to you. It fits perfectly. Another reminder that tools like colors adapt over time. You spend the afternoon together testing new mixes, inventing playful challenges. Make something with only ash and sap. Paint a tree using just the colors from a morning fire, and recording your favorites on scraps of palm. As the sun dips lower, the artist's mother brings out a plate of flatbread and honey. You all eat together, trading jokes and complaints about the stubbornness of goat hair. You realize you've become part of a chain, a living tradition passed down not just through recipes, but through hands and laughter, and the gentle dare to try something new. That evening, you return to your hut with a new brush, a sample of experimental pigment, and a head full of ideas. And as you set out your palette for tomorrow, you feel a quiet sense of pride. The Earth's old colors are still here. So are its artists. And together you're painting a future that's every bit as vivid as its past. Night falls early, soft and full of the hush that comes just before a festival. You're invited to join a gathering in the main square, a celebration not of the harvest or the rains, but of color itself. It's a new tradition inspired by your months of mixing and sharing. The villagers have strung up banners dyed with pomegranate, cochineal, and indigo. Lanterns painted with bone white and ash gray flicker in the warm air. Everyone's brought something: a painted pot, a scrap of cloth, a palm leaf fan, even a handful of colored pebbles. The children parade through the square, faces streaked with wild patterns in every pigment the village can muster. Elders sit nearby, proud and a little amused, trading stories about the days when colors were rationed, when the only red was rust, the only black was soot. You move through the crowd, touching base with old friends, and new, admiring the work, delicate flowers, fierce animals, even abstract swirls that could be sky or river, or simply someone's mood. You realize that for all the recipes and rules, color is personal. Each person finds their own meaning, their own memory, their own secret in the shade they choose. A girl tugs your sleeve. She wants you to see her mural, a wild tumble of goats and birds and flowers painted on a wall of sun-dried brick. She used nearly every pigment in your kit, and though the lines are crooked and the animals a bit lopsided, the mural sings with joy. You kneel down, truly looking at it. How did you decide what color to use? She shrugs. I used what made me happy. It's the oldest secret in the world, and you smile, feeling something loosen inside you. Later, as dusk deepens, the villagers light a fire in the center of the square. You all gather around telling stories of pigments and disasters of bold colors, and near misses of how the sky once turned yellow with dust, and the village made do by painting only in white and gray until the rain returned. Historians might one day ask what this night meant, what colors were chosen, what was said or left unsaid. But you know the truth. The meaning lives in the laughter, the singing, the gentle way a brush or a hand can change the world if only for an evening. As the fire dies down and families drift home, you linger for a moment watching the light play on the walls, turning every color gold. You carry that glow with you all the way home. And when you lay out your paints that night, you do so with gratitude, because you finally see what the journey was for, not just to find color but to share it. The festival's embers fade to a hush, and the village settles into its deepest kind of quiet. The hush that holds the memory of music and laughter, the subtle glow of colors lingering on walls and faces. You sit outside your hut, the last streaks of paint drying on your hands, watching the stars blink awake one by one. Your pigments are lined up before you, each in their own gourd or bowl, some mixed fresh today, others weeks old. You run your fingers across the lids, remembering the story of each: the goatherder's golden yellow, the pink stone from the pigment master, the sharp green from copper scrap, the deep black born of bone and fire. Tonight you want to paint something only for yourself. No commissions, no rituals, just the pleasure of mixing colors in the lamplight, letting your mind wander wherever it pleases. You grind a little ochre, a drop of egg yolk, a pinch of mica for shimmer, and begin. You paint a scene not quite real. A hill at dawn, sky pink and gold, a winding path marked with thumbprints, a tree whose leaves are every shade you've ever mixed. In the roots of the tree you tuck a swirl of indigo blue. In the branches, flashes of red and white. In the trunk, the gentle hush of ash and bone. A few quick strokes, a flick of a brush, and their life. Quiet, ordinary, but true. You pause, letting the brush rest. You see yourself in the picture, maybe not in the figure's face, but in the journey, the gathering, the blending of dust and memory and hope. Historians may someday argue over how much of this art was invention, how much tradition. They might puzzle over the recipes, the codes, the layers of meaning lost to time. But you know the art is in the living, in the act of making, of marking, of sharing. Even as colors fade, the hands remember. You let the painting dry and sit beside it as the moon climbs. The night air is cool. Somewhere a goat bleats softly, and a distant drum echoes once then settles. You breathe in slow and deep, letting the world shrink to a gentle pulsing quiet. Colors, dreams, and night all melting together. And now, as the fires go out, and the village curls into sleep, you rest beside your colors, old friends, and new. The hush of the world is softer than any pigment, blanketing the hills, and winding through the empty lanes, carrying the gentle promise that the earth will still be here in the morning, waiting for another day's discovery. You slow your breathing, feeling the cool air settle over your skin, a faint trace of ochre dust beneath your nails, a memory of honey and wood smoke still on your tongue. The voices from the festival drift further away, fading into the low hum of nighttime insects and distant rhythmic drumming. Your mind drifts through the colors of the day: sunrise pink, river gold, the gray-green hush before rain, and that bright glint of mica that seemed to linger even after dark. Let your thoughts wander slow and gentle, as if you're brushing color across the canvas of your dreams. There's no rush. Every memory settles. Every story finds its place. You are surrounded by the calm of centuries, by the wisdom in the earth, by the comfort of all the artists known and unknown who came before you, whose hands mixed paint in this same moonlit hush. In this gentle quiet, the world asks nothing of you. You are enough just as you are, worn and streaked with pigment, awake to beauty, part of the living memory of color. Let your breath slow. Let your body rest. The pigments are safe. The art will wait. And so you drift softly, gently into sleep,